The Scream by Edvard Munch is iconic and its legacy lives on in popular culture, but most importantly, it represents an alarming deficit, the disenchantment of reality, accompanied by the resulting existential dread. The Scream embodies not only a sense of terror, but an endless background hum of meaninglessness. The inspiration for this painting came when Munch was overlooking a fjord in Norway. One evening I was walking along a path. The city was on one side and the fjord below. I felt tired and ill. I stopped and looked out over the fjord. The sun was setting and the clouds turning blood red. I sensed a scream passing through nature. It seemed to me that I heard the scream. I painted this picture, painting the clouds as actual blood. This became the Scream. The origin story of this painting echoes an experience of insanity, of which Munch was no stranger. His manic-depressive sister was housed at a nearby asylum at the foot of the hill, and Munch himself dealt with many psychological disturbances throughout his life, and they were oftentimes the subject of the focus of many of his art pieces. The popularity of this painting is evidence of its universal resonance. Just like other incredible works of human history, this painting tells us something about the nature of humanity. Its value cannot be overstated, some calling it the Mona Lisa of our generation. Understanding imagery is a subjective endeavor, and in this video, I will provide my own interpretation of it and the logic behind the interpretation, but know that there are many other ways to look at this painting. My intention for this section of the video is to teach you not only about this painting, but also give you some tools to apply to any pieces of artwork that you interact with. So let's begin with the absolute basics. This is a Rorschach image. It tests various aspects of one's personality by simply recording what you see in the image. The ultimate purpose of the Rorschach is to analyze the unconscious contents of your personality. You aren't deciding what to see when each image arises. Rather, you are seeing what has been unconsciously projected onto the image. Not only can the Rorschach test tell us about the individual, but they can be standardized for entire populations of people. In a similar sense, art is a representation of the artist's unconscious mind, which is oftentimes a reflection of all of our unconscious minds. In fact, I believe that art pieces that are powerful for that reason, that they resonate with so many people at a deep unconscious level. The primary thing to understand here is that art communicates with us unconsciously. We find certain art pieces appealing not because they look pretty, not because they're well made, but because they speak to something deeper inside the human psyche. So the primary dialogue of Munch's work has to do with the existential dread of meaninglessness. This sentiment is epitomized, of course, most famously by his work, The Scream, a rather unfortunate artwork to be considered the Mona Lisa of our time. This brings up a good question. What has changed since the Enlightenment? What happened to the sly smirk of the Mona Lisa that's now been changed into this indescript individual screaming along a fjord? The Mona Lisa's sly smirk in front of a natural backdrop exudes a sense of confidence. There's a sense of understanding in her smile, perfectly encapsulating the emergence of the newly enlightened mind. Reason, rationality, skepticism are flourishing, and no image does a better job at communicating this enormous shift in human history, hence its ubiquitous popularity. On the other hand, the Scream could not be more opposite. Starting with the focal point of this image, we see a remarkably bland individual. No hair nor detail, reflecting the loss of individual identity. The main character is also slightly distorted, just like the natural Norwegian backdrop, in stark opposition to the street and the other two figures on the left. To me, this distortion represents an experience of psychosis, or just an altered state of consciousness in general. The author writes that the scream was literally audible. He experienced the scream coming from nature. This was congruent with his long bouts of depression and family history of psychological disturbances. One way to understand psychotic symptoms is as penetrations of the unconscious mind into consciousness. Another fascinating characteristic of this painting is the blood-red sky, intended to represent literal blood. It was most likely inspired by the impressive Norwegian sunsets, but with a sinister twist. Perhaps another indication of a psychotic episode. Taking the piece in as a whole, the natural backdrop is quite vague and dull. The lack of detail represents a disenchantment of reality, or in other words, a de-animation. We know that in previous millennia, human psychology was most likely different than it is now. According to Ian McGilchrist, a psychiatrist, the chances are our experience of reality was primarily mediated through the right hemisphere of our brains. The right hemisphere understands humanity as an integral part of nature and derives meaning and purpose from the interaction and interplay between humanity and nature. For example, stars aligning might suggest good luck to the observer, or the owl you saw last night might indicate a bad omen. Ian McGilchrist describes the development of the left hemisphere as a parasite on the right hemisphere, because many of its functions must actually inhibit the right hemisphere in order to function properly. Zooming out and kind of analyzing human history in its entirety, we know that religious sensibility has decreased as the rational scientific mind has flourished. Another way to put this is that with the emergence of the scientific rational mind, a certain animistic sensibility with reality was lost, resulting in the experience of meaninglessness, almost a direct result of the Enlightenment. To the left of this scene are two figures whose interpretations solidify this art piece as the Mona Lisa of our time. One figure is a man, the other a woman. Both are walking away from the main character, according to the artist, and it is thought that these two represent gods. From a Jungian perspective, these two individuals represent the masculine and feminine aspect of what's considered the divine function, a human instinct for psychological growth through the installation of meaning and purpose and even direction in one's life. Now, obviously, their departure represents a reduction in this sensibility. The world is no longer animate, it's no longer meaningful. Zarathustra's proclamation that God is dead foreshadows the despair of a meaningless existence that the scream accurately encapsulates. In a world where 1/3 of teenage girls considered suicide in the past year, and the younger generations are suffering from imposter syndrome, meaningless lives, and the inability to find motivation, is there a better image to represent this experience? But what is the way forward? Carl Jung viewed the religious structure of a society as a necessary counterbalance to what he called mass-mindedness. However, it is essential to understand that today's rendition of religion is part of the problem. Religion is a creedal institution taking psychological life, the natural variability of the human experience, and turning it into dogmatic principles. In many ways, religious institutions prevent people from having the meaningful and transcendent experiences that may be required for their psychological growth. Or in other words, an internal interaction with the contents of your unconscious mind that act in a guiding manner, leading you to a better version of yourself. Many have had experiences of this, and we seem to kind of idealize these experiences, and they're extremely common in religious traditions. A few examples include Paul's conversion on his road to Damascus and Moses in the burning bush. But even guys like Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla spoke of a guiding force in their life, though not attributing it to a specific deity. In fact, speaking of the Force in Star Wars is a dramatized version of this experience, an internal kind of capability that acts in a guiding manner. Through the lens of the scientific paradigm that most people are probably comfortable with, it can be understood in a different way. The unconscious mind is picking up on tons of information that we're not consciously picking up on. According to the latest research, up to 99% of the processing in our brain happens without our conscious awareness. In other words, 99% of the brain is quote-unquote unconscious. There's evidence to suggest that our unconscious minds are worse at lying than our conscious minds. Or in other words, they're closer and more aware of the truth of who we are and the emotions that reside below the surface than our conscious minds ever could be. And so interacting with the unconscious mind gives us an opportunity to tap into a huge repository of information regarding our own lives. Others may be more comfortable calling this aspect of human life God, but I would use that word very carefully. Either way, humanity has lost its sensibility to this aspect of human experience. As humanity plunges deeper into the abyss of modernity, we have lost touch with the very essence of what it means to be human. The once unstoppable drive to create, to innovate, to explore has withered away, replaced by numbing complacency and a sense of futility. Our existence has become a meaningless charade, and the haunting, silent screams of despair echo through the halls of our collective consciousness, a chilling reflection of our lost humanity. In this dark and uncertain future, we are left to wonder what horrors lie ahead. If you want to learn more about the unconscious mind and its influence in your daily life, and also its influence throughout history, be sure to subscribe.